Welcome back to another team selection video for Double Gameweek 36. I've got 2 free transfers. I've got several players who are a doubt heading into this double, including Solly March, and we'll have official confirmation tomorrow by De Zerbi. We should get some more updates, but it's not looking too good on that front. I'll be discussing the key transfers to make this week, such as March to McAllister. Also, do we bring in Isak or Wilson? And many more questions and topics, such as the best triple ups for Newcastle and Brighton. So let's get straight into this video, talk about how I did in Gameweek 35 before moving on to my transfer plans for Double Gameweek 36. And I'll be quite frank from the get-go, there are so many benching dilemmas for me and also key decisions. Do I use one free transfer, use both, take a -4 or a -8? Anything is possible this week. I'm leaving my options open and you'll see my final squad in the deadline stream. It's so difficult choosing between Kepa Arrizabalaga and Raya on certain occasions, and I just looked at both games and I thought, I think Chelsea and Brentford will concede, but I think Brentford are more likely to concede more goals, and if there were to be a clean sheet from either side, I think Chelsea are slightly more likely, despite the fact that they were facing an informed Bournemouth side. Chelsea ended up winning the game 3-1, Kepa got 3 points overall with a couple of saves, but Raya got the exact same score, so it's really difficult to separate those two sometimes. Ultimately, there's nothing here that I've gained or lost, so it's not really that important, but heading into Double Gameweek 36, I've got a big decision to make. Do I start Kepa Arrizabalaga or David Raya? That will be even more difficult, I think, heading into the next game week and the next deadline. And also heading into Double Gameweek 37, whilst Kepa has a double game week, it's against Man City and Man United away. So I'd be very open to a move to another goalkeeper, even Ederson, who is not my cup of tea. And you'll probably know this if you see my other FPL streams and videos. But still decent from Kepa Arrizabalaga, nothing special. And the same goes for David Raya. I bought him a few weeks ago and he's done a very good job for me. Trent Alexander-Arnold delivered a clean sheet and a bonus point against Brentford, and in recent weeks he's getting so many assists and he is pretty much trumping every other defender in the game out of the water, and Trent Alexander-Arnold is a good option to end this season. The problem is a lot of us will be looking to bench him in 36 and 37 and he's got no doubles left. You've also got all these different options that you may want to go for from Man City, Brighton, Chelsea, Newcastle, etc. Maybe not Chelsea, by the way. I probably should have said Man United in that instance, but you catch my drift. With Trent Alexander-Arnold, I like him a lot. I think he's going to continue to do well, but he is a bit of a problem structurally in terms of how much he costs, because for example, in my case, I've got Bruno Fernandes, Salah and Trent Alexander-Arnold, so it makes it very difficult for me to get Isak and Wilson at the same time without either selling Haaland, Kieran Trippier or taking a -8 hit. But having said all of that, Trent Alexander-Arnold is worth it, but if you are looking to bench him in 36 and 37, it might be worth selling him at this point if you're not even going to put him in your starting 11 for the next 2 game weeks. But I have to say, even though he's facing Leicester, who've been pretty good offensively, they leak in so many goals, and Trent Alexander-Arnold is capable of some very big things. He actually got an assist last time out against Leicester and also 3 bonus points, despite the fact that Leicester scored in that game. And also, I remember just a few years back, it feels like such a long time ago now, Trent Alexander-Arnold was someone I sold heading into a game against Leicester away. Liverpool won 4-0 and Trent Alexander-Arnold got a goal and 2 assists, and it's one of the worst transfers I've ever made. So maybe that's in the back of my mind, but I ultimately would try to start Trent if you can this week, despite the clean sheet probability is not looking too good. I also had Luke Shaw here with a 2-pointer, and ultimately it was down to Shaw versus Trippier in my starting 11. Trippier got 1 point, Shaw got 2, so I gained 1 point from that. You could say nothing major, but really I look at that game and West Ham were probably the better team overall, but Man United, I mean, you can't help but think if De Gea didn't make that calamitous error, they could have maybe kept the clean sheet away from home against West Ham, and the likes of Shaw and all these other defenders like Lindelof could have done a really good job for you, David De Gea as well included. But Man United are just really poor away from home. At Old Trafford, though, it's a different story. They've kept 5 clean sheets on the bounce in the Premier League, and they are very tough to beat there, and they rarely concede goals. So I still like Luke Shaw for Gameweek 36, but just like with Trent Alexander-Arnold, he's another one I'm looking to potentially bench, and I don't like the idea of that whatsoever. The final defender is Pervis Estupiñán. Whilst I wasn't too surprised about Everton scoring, no one expected that to be a 5-1 game, and Estupiñán got 0 points in the end, so very disappointing stuff from him. He was a hero in Gameweek 34, that double game week, but I look at the fixtures in 36 and 37, and there's only one good fixture out of those 4 games in those 2 doubles, so it's not really that essential to go for a Brighton defender, including Estupiñán, despite the fact that he's got assist threat and bonus points potential. So he is someone who you could also consider benching in 36, and it just makes all of these benching dilemmas and 50-50 calls just even more difficult to make heading into Double Gameweek 36. I'm going to cover that very soon, but very disappointing stuff from my defense and my backline, with the exception of Trent Alexander-Arnold. The only shining light for me this week in the midfield was Mohamed Salah, who scored and claimed all 3 bonus points against Brentford. So it was the Liverpool players who delivered for me in Game Week 35. Unfortunately, I can't say the same about everyone else in my midfield and also in my squad. Bruno Fernandes blanked, but I have to say, he's playing really well this season. He's created, I think, over 100 chances in the Premier League this season, but he doesn't have that clinical striker or finisher up front to really convert those chances. The only one who's been doing a decent job of that this season is Marcus Rashford, but he scored 2 goals since February and 4 in his last 15 across all competitions. So Marcus Rashford has been a bit out of sorts, but he's the only one, I think, apart from Bruno, who can add goals from the midfield and also do a really good job up front if needed. And I was a bit surprised about Man United's tactics, putting Bruno Fernandes on the left to go up against Carrera. You probably would have thought it would be Marcus Rashford, and that could have been a really good battle there for Man United. But instead, they did this thing of Weghorst as the attacking midfielder just behind, Marcus Rashford. I just didn't think that was the right thing to do, of course, but having said all of that, of course, Ten Hag knows what he's doing. He's done a really good job this season. And going at home next against Wolves, you would still back Man United to produce a response and also secure the top 4. But away from home, I'd be tempted to sometimes bench these Man United assets. And that is something I might consider going into next season if we don't see a serious improvement in that regard. To complete the midfield, though, it was even more disappointment. Solly March didn't start the game against Everton, despite the fact they got 11 points in the reverse fixture. Everton obviously were 3-0 up at half-time. March then came on in the second half, and then half an hour later, he came off with a hamstring problem, despite looking pretty impressive in that game. So that was very frustrating, I think, for March owners. And despite his limited game time in recent weeks, I think he's been pretty good whenever he comes off the bench. So it is a bit of a shame to see him come off. Hopefully he is available, but it's not looking too good on this front. And, most of us would predict him to maybe miss the rest of the season. That is quite likely. But let's wait for official confirmation first before selling him, in my opinion. The final midfielder is Mitoma, who got a fortuitous assist, but he was also quite unlucky not to have a goal, which was blocked by his own teammate Colwill. So Mitoma owners have also been a bit unlucky in recent weeks, you could say, just like McAllister owners were before the last 2 game weeks. I think it kind of swings and roundabouts, whatever you want to say about that. But ultimately, Brighton midfielders are still pretty viable for Double Gameweeks 36 and 37, but the fixtures aren't that impressive. Apart from Southampton at home, where you probably see a really high ceiling for all these assets, those other games could be very tough for Brighton, and whilst they may score in all of those games, it might not be that many goals as they've been doing in recent weeks. It won't be another 6-0 against Wolves, that's for certain, unless something absolutely ridiculous happens. So that was my midfield 5. Only Salah did pretty well for me. Mitoma got something, but the rest were very disappointing. Maybe he's going back to his true form. Ollie Watkins got a 1-pointer, picking up a yellow card and blanking once again against Wolves. He got a 2-pointer in the reverse fixture. Now he gets a 1-pointer. I was actually not that confident of him scoring, but because of his form since December and also Aston Villa's trajectory, Wolves off the back of a 6-0 defeat against Brighton, I just started him, and I was quite happy not to make a transfer this week because the likes of Isak and Wilson blanked anyway, so that didn't, damage me too much. But ultimately, Ollie Watkins is someone I'm looking to sell in Double Gameweek 36 anyway. Even if he actually produced a return in 35, it would have been the same thing. So my thought process hasn't changed too much, but it is disappointing to see Aston Villa now slowly, have a bit of a stumble, and even the likes of Ollie Watkins aren't looking too impressive. And it's worth mentioning that Wolves are in the bottom 3 for their away record in this Premier League campaign. But at home, they're in the top half. So I think when you look at Wolves, when they're away from home, you can play all these Man United assets and probably expect something from them. But whenever Wolves are away, that's where they tend to struggle. And that's where you can maybe target Wolves as a fixture and go for those players from teams that are obviously facing Wolves in a particular game week. For example, Arsenal in their final game week of the season are going to be up against Wolves. So that's something else to consider. Maybe the likes of Odegaard, Martinelli, Saka could be very viable options in Game Week 38. But that's just something to think about later down the line. The last player in this starting 11 was Erling Haaland, who blanked. He had 3 big chances, which is the joint most he's had all season in a Premier League game, and yet he missed some gilt-edged chances. Maybe it's because he has a bit of a connection with Leeds. He was born there, but who knows at this point. You just can't expect even a robot like himself to deliver in every single game. I would expect a response from him in the next Premier League match. I think he'll start against Everton, but that isn't a guarantee, as we'll get on to very shortly as well. So that's my starting 11. Let's now talk about who I captained and also how my rank was affected by only a 37-pointer this game week across my whole starting 11. The one silver lining is that all of those on my bench all got 1-pointers, and the only real criticism you could say is that I started Stupinian over Trippier, so I lost out on 1 point from that decision, but everything else I got pretty much spot on. I can't say the same about the captaincy though, but on another day, Haaland scores at least 2 of those 3 big chances, and he could have been on for a mega haul against Leeds United, but sometimes these things don't happen. I'm not too fussed about Haaland blanking or not, but it does maybe make you regret not going against him on certain occasions. Salah was the standout this week, so fair play to those of you that went for him. I got another red arrow once again, and that's 2 weeks in a row now where a McAllister goal has turned a small green arrow into a red one for me, so that is very frustrating. But then again, sometimes these things happen early in the season, especially just after the World Cup. McAllister owners were quite unfortunate, and now it's the time for March and Matoma owners to be a bit more unlucky in this instance. But let's now talk about my transfer plans for Double Gameweek 36, where, like I said, I could use both of my free transfers, only use one and roll the second one, or I can even take hits. I have so many options this week, and let's talk about that right now. In goal, we already have the first benching dilemma, Kepa Arrizabalaga versus David Raya, and I'm very conflicted about this because I look at David Raya's record and a lot of his hauls recently have come away from home, and he hasn't produced a single return in a home match since Game Week 22 against Southampton. I believe this was in early February, and whilst Kepa Arrizabalaga and Chelsea aren't the most reliable in this moment in time, they still haven't been too bad defensively over the course of the season, and Kepa can still get some points from saves and bonus points, which Raya can do as well, to be fair. And also David Raya got a good return against West Ham in the reverse fixture, but it's very difficult to tell, I think, between Kepa Arrizabalaga and David Raya. I think most people would maybe lean towards Raya, but it's still a really close one for me, and this is something I could change, quite constantly before the deadline. So let's see how my final selection is when we get to the deadline stream, but I'm currently favouring Kepa Arrizabalaga. I know Nottingham Forest look very impressive against Southampton, but away from home they still have the worst record, and I would expect Chelsea to win this game, and maybe they can keep a clean sheet. I just look at the probabilities of keeping one, and I think Chelsea are slightly higher than Brentford this week, but I might change my mind by the time we get to the Saturday deadline. We go to the defence, and it's the same thing once again. Benching dilemmas all over. I'm going for Trent Alexander-Arnold, and he's facing Leicester away. I'm not that convinced of a clean sheet. I think it could be a high-scoring game with Liverpool ultimately prevailing, but what I'm really hoping for are some attacking returns from Trent, and if he can get a clean sheet and some bonus points on top of it, he could be in for a big haul, of course, but it is a difficult one, I think, determining who you start between Trent Alexander-Arnold, a second Newcastle defender, Estupinian, and Luke Shaw. I think there's not much to separate all of these options, and while Shaw has the best chance of a clean sheet in my opinion, he also probably has the lowest ceiling, especially as a centre-back, even though, of course, early in the season, when he was playing in that position, he was getting a lot of bonus points, and before the penalty he gave away against Brighton recently, he was on course for 2 bonus points as well, but things quickly change from that point onwards. Let me go to the rest of the back line. I'm currently going for Estupinian, but you look at both games, are Brighton going to keep a clean sheet? I don't think so. I think against Arsenal, it's going to be probably a high-scoring game with Arsenal being the favourites. And against Newcastle, to be fair, in Game Week 2, it was a 0-0 draw, but I just can't see the same happening once again at St James's Park. And with Newcastle losing the last home game, I think they'll be well up for it, winning their next match at their home stadium. So that's going to be difficult, and I might end up benching Estupinian in the end, despite the fact that he has a double game week. So that's going to be a really tricky decision to make. Then we go to the rest of the defence. I'm going for Botman with a double game week, and actually, Newcastle kept clean sheets in both of these reverse fixtures against Leeds and Brighton and Hove Albion, as I just mentioned. So I will start Botman. I think I'm fairly certain of that. What it really comes down to for me are 3 defenders, but Kieran Trippier is nailed on. He's the only defender I know I'm going to start this week, despite Newcastle not keeping enough clean sheets in the last couple of months, and Kieran Trippier not getting any attacking returns, or very few, in that same time frame. But I'm going to go for him, and I think Newcastle could keep 1 clean sheet, and you're looking at Leeds away fixture as the most likely. And if not, you are hoping for something from Trippier in terms of the attacking threat, which he still has, but hasn't been able to get enough assists in the last couple of months as well. Now, one defender I am currently benching is Luke Shaw, but ironically, I think United have probably the best chance of a clean sheet in Game Week 36, so it's really difficult to determine this, and I think it's going to be between one of Estupinian, Trent Alexander-Arnold and Luke Shaw to drop to the bench, and if we're purely basing it off clean sheet probabilities, I might end up benching Estupinian, which could be a disaster, but you could say the same thing about benching Trent against Leicester or Luke Shaw at home to Wolves. So let's wait and see what happens. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below, but I'm currently going for this back 4. One player I'm definitely not benching this game week is Mohamed Salah away to Leicester. I think he's probably the best captaincy option from the single game week players, even over Erling Haaland. I would generally go as far to say that, and I would even consider him over Matoma, Kieran Trippier, Estupinian, whichever midfielder or player you want to talk about, even the forwards, Callum Wilson and Isak. I would generally consider Salah as a captaincy option over them. He's been in great form recently, and I know most of his goals and returns come at Anfield, but he can still do it away from home. And with Leicester's struggles, I just don't see them keeping Liverpool out, and I think Salah has a really good chance of being involved. So I think Salah has to start, and he could even be one of your captaincy choices. You have to consider him at least, in my opinion. Then we go to the rest of the midfield. Matoma is also another one worth considering for the captaincy. I'd probably put him in the top 4, but he might not even make the top 3 for the best captaincy options this week. He has done well against Arsenal in both fixtures this season, in the Carabao Cup and at the Amex, and he could do something once again. And also against Newcastle, they might lose the game, Brighton, but they could still get some returns, get some goals, and Matoma is still a very good option. But in recent weeks, he has been a bit quiet, didn't do anything in the FA Cup semi-final. He also got a lucky assist against Everton, which technically isn't an official assist, and in the 5 Premier League games before that, he blanked in every single one of them. So he isn't in the greatest of form, but I think with these 2 doubles coming up, despite the difficulty of 3 of those 4 fixtures, I think Matoma can do extremely well. So I would recommend keeping him, and of course, with a lot of people with Solly March, I think the priority would be to sell him, especially if he's ruled out for Game Week 36 or the rest of the season. Let's wait and see what happens on that front too. Now, my next midfielder isn't McAllister, but Bruno Fernandes, who's at home to Wolves, and he got an assist in the reverse fixture, a 6-pointer. But despite that, I'm still considering benching him as well. So for me, there's 3 or 4 players I'm considering to bench. So it's going to be one of Luke Shaw, Bruno Fernandes, Estupinian, or Trent Alexander-Arnold. And I'm currently benching Luke Shaw, and I'm very unsure about all of those players. You know, benching any single one of them would make me uncomfortable this week. So if you still have the bench boost, you know, this would not be a bad time to use it, I think. The reason I probably wouldn't use it if I had it still is because I've got Greenwood on my bench, and he would kind of ruin it technically. But the rest of the players on my bench look pretty good this week and could do a very good job, and I'd be very frustrating to see bench points, which has happened a lot this season, but it sometimes is inevitable, especially when you have a lot of squad depth. The final midfielder will be Marcus Rashford. While you can make a case for considering benching him, just like with Bruno Fernandes, I think I'm going to start Marcus Rashford. He scored in the reverse fixture, but was subbed off at halftime, I think, due to an injury. But I think he could do pretty well in this game. He's done it before against Wolves at home. So if I had to pick one United midfielder for this week, it probably would be Rashford. But it's going to be very difficult, I think, with all of my players, you know, deciding who I have to bench ultimately. But it has to be done. You can only play 11 players. Let's now complete this starting 11 with the 2 strikers. Speaking of benching dilemmas, there is the distinct possibility that Erling Haaland is benched against Everton. I don't think it will happen. I think he'll start, but it wouldn't surprise me if he was on the bench, and ultimately if Man City are trailing or need a goal, he will come on eventually. So what I'm kind of hoping for is for Haaland not to feature at all, and so the likes of Luke Shaw can come into my starting 11 and I can start all of those players. And also it would be great for Everton to get a result to make the Premier League title race a bit interesting, at least for the end of the season. But you would expect Man City to still win despite their focus being on the Champions League, because they are able to rotate. They've got some key players that don't feature at all against Real Madrid in the Champions League. So I think they'll be able to manage the energy levels and also be focused enough to win this game. And despite Everton's big result against Brighton, Man City is on another level at this moment in time, and they haven't lost a single game since January. The final forward, and you won't be surprised about this if you've heard my recent videos and streams, is Isak. For me, it's going to be between him and Callum Wilson, and I said this before, if I had to pick one, it would be Isak. Callum Wilson has the better stats, especially since Double Gameweek 29, and he's also scored more goals throughout the whole season. But Isak, for me, is a bit more nailed on in terms of minutes. He's also on penalties and better for bonus points, and that's why I'm going for Isak. He also is a bit more impressive on the eye, and I think he is the best forward to buy in Double Gameweek 36. But if we get a leak just before the deadline that Callum Wilson starts and Isak is benched, I would change my mind and go for Callum Wilson instead, because I look at that Leeds fixture and that is the one you really want to target offensively, and that's where I may, you know, kind of change my mind and go back on this decision and choose Callum Wilson instead. But it's really close. It's almost 50-50, but I would favour Isak if we get news that both of them start. And ideally I would have both, but I wouldn't be able to do so without taking a -8 hit And the only way I can do it with a -4 is by selling Trippier to a 3.9 million defender, and I'm not so sure if that's worth it for the hit. But let me know if you disagree. Put it forward in the comment section down below. Let's now talk about the captaincy, my bench, and then later on I'll go to FPL.team and briefly discuss Double Gameweek 37. With the exception of Greenwood, I've got a very solid bench this week with David Raya, Luke Shaw and Solly March. And if Solly March is fit, he probably comes into the starting 11, and that becomes the big question. Who do I bench as well on top of Luke Shaw? I have so many benching dilemmas. Even the goalkeepers aren't completely settled and nailed on in the starting 11. It could be Raya in for Kepa by the very end. And also, look, this is only using one free transfer, by the way, bringing in Isak for Ollie Watkins. If I want to use my second free transfer, it probably would be McAllister in for Solly March, but then I'd have to bench one of Bruno Fernandes, Trent Alexander-Arnold, or a Stupinian, maybe even Rashford. This is the problem, I think, with using my second free transfer in this instance. It might be worth it. McAllister's on penalties, good for bonus points, and in good form, but the fixtures are pretty tough, and there's also a few other players I might want to go for in 37. So if I roll the transfer in this instance with this squad that you see on screen, then I could also add a second or third Man City player in Double Gameweek 37, and also potentially have the possibility of having 2 free transfers in Gameweek 38, depending on what I do in the future, and that could be very beneficial, and it could be a really good way to wrap this season up. So let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below as well. I'd be very intrigued to see them. In terms of the captaincy, I'm currently favouring Isak. He is my favourite Double Gameweek player in 36, but I'm also considering Salah for the captaincy, and he's probably just a little bit above the likes of Trippier, Mitoma, Botman, Estupinian at this moment in time. If I had McAllister, it'd still be the same thing, I think, and I actually rather would captain Mitoma over McAllister, despite what's happened in recent weeks, with McAllister doing very well and Mitoma just not getting enough attacking returns in the last 6 game weeks in FPL. So that is my starting 11. Things could change, even the captaincy, but I think I'm going to stick with Isak. And if Callum Wilson comes in the end because he's starting and Isak is benched, Callum Wilson would be my captain as well, I believe. But that is my starting 11 currently, my bench, and also this proposed transfer plan. Only one free transfer of Isak in for Ollie Watkins. Let's now go into FPL.team and I'll show you how my team looks like for Double Gameweek 37 as well. Assuming March can play again this season, he would be in the starting 11, and it would be Kepa Arrizabalaga in goal. I'd have a back three of Trippier, Luke Shaw, Stupinian, a midfield 5 of Salah, Bruno Fernandes, Rashford, Mitoma and Solly March, and a front 2 of Isak and Erling Haaland, and the bench would be Raya, Trent, Botman and Greenwood. However, I don't think Solly March will be available once again, so this is where the McAllister transfer could be very fruitful, not just for 36, but also in 37, so that is still one possibility that exists. I could also just start Trent over Solly March, and that's pretty fine. But with 2 free transfers in this case, or even just one, I would be looking to bolster my Man City assets. Even if it's Edison in goal for Kepa Arrizabalaga, that is something I would consider. So I've got plenty of options here, and it's not just about focusing on Gameweek 36, but also how my team would be set up for Double Gameweek 37 and 38. And with only 3 game weeks left, I think the best way to kind of approach every single week is just tackle what's in front of you and focus on optimizing your team for the next game week. But if you can tackle 2 game weeks with 1 stone, and maybe McAllister in for March could be, a really good way of doing that, then I would recommend that as well. But I think ultimately what you need to prioritize is tackle Double Gameweek 36 first, and then focus on 37 too. If you can get yourself in a position where you have 2 free transfers in 37, that could be fantastic, and you could also optimize your team very well for one of the biggest double game weeks that we've had all season. So the floor is now yours. Be sure to let me know your thoughts, not just in the comment section, but also in the upcoming deadline stream, where we might have some more information and we could also make some more refined and informed decisions. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it or found it useful, then be sure to smash the like button and subscribe for new. Let's try to get this video to over 300 likes. Let's keep on pushing towards 20,000 subscribers and beyond. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram, DylanRCM, and check all the links in the description below for the Patreon, channel memberships, Discord server, and the FPL League. All of that is there. I wish you all the best of luck for Double Gameweek 36 and also the remaining 3 game weeks overall, and I'll see you next time.